Hello, everyone. My name is Claire, and I chose to talk about the environmental impact of fracking for my project. So in today's lesson, we're going to be going over what fracking is, the history of fracking, the pros and cons, and how fracking will change our planet. So before we can talk about any of the environmental impacts of fracking, it's important to know what exactly fracking is, because it's really the process of fracking that causes so many of its impacts. So overall, hydraulic fracking is a method of extracting natural gas below the Earth's surface using pressurized fluid in a well system. And this image gives you a really good picture of how fracking occurs. Up top here, you can see a well that lays on the surface of the ground, and there's a well that gets drilled into the surface as well. So this well is going to be drilled until we get to this shale layer. And the shale layer of the ground is where natural oil lies. It is used to make cement and bricks and things like that. So it's difficult to break through, which is why we need a lot of pressure to break through it. So we start by drilling down about 2,500 to 3,000 meters into the ground. And that'll put us well into the shale layer. So you're not too close to other layers that might not have oil, and you're not too deep below the surface as well. So once you get 25 to 3,000 meters in, then this is called our kickoff point. And from there, the drill will start to go horizontally. So it'll do a 90-degree turn, and it'll go for about 1,500 more meters into the ground. And if you look at these little jagged parts, these occur because once we get to this end point, a perforated gun that is on the end of the drill gets shot into the ground, and little holes form and fissures start to make cracks in the shale layer. So we want these cracks because when fluid pumps through them, that's how we're going to extract our oil. So the drill gets retracted, and then pressurized fluid that is mainly made up of water, it's 90% water, but also has 10% of sand, which keeps the fissures open. It has chemicals that make the water softer and slicker, and it also purifies the water. And then it also has acids that help to draw out the oils. So this fluid gets pumped at a high pressure, and then it goes into the fissures and breaks them wider open. And from there, oil comes to the surface, which you can see in this close-up in the diagram. And then this water gets pumped back up into the well. So if we go back and look at the history of fracking, it became used in the 1940s. It was actually present during the Civil War, but it was a lot different. And the fracking that we do nowadays actually started in 1970. So in the 1940s, fracking was occurring, but it wasn't the horizontal fracking that we do today. So there was less of a chance of that oil being extracted. But in the 1970s, they found out that you can do horizontal drilling, and that led to a lot of more oil being extracted every time they were fracking. And then in the mid 2000s, there was a large boom in the increase of shale oil production. And that's because gas prices were starting to skyrocket. So companies found out that they could make a lot of money by extracting their own natural oil instead of going abroad. And shale oil production became a really large industry at that point. Also in the mid 2000s, a lot of states began to ban fracking. So some states were New York and Vermont that have still banned fracking to this day. And Maryland has placed bans, but they're not permanent bans. So fracking may occur in the future in Maryland. And then a lot of places abroad have also banned fracking. Egypt has banned it, and the UK has as well. And later in the slides, we'll talk about why places are choosing to ban fracking, because it really has to do with the environmental impact. And in today's age, fracking is still taking place in most of the US states, although some of the ones that I have mentioned have banned it. So the reason that fracking is so controversial is because there are a lot of environmental impacts and we still don't know the full scope of those impacts, but it is also a really lucrative industry and it creates a lot of jobs. So many people argue that that's a reason why we should still continue to use fracking. So on the pro fracking debate side, we have that idea that it creates jobs and oil is a valuable resource. And again, fracking is very lucrative. You can make a lot of money with natural oil. And before, we would have to go abroad to get our oil, but fracking allows us to get it straight from the US. So fracking is a big convenience. And when it comes to big industries that are concerned with making money, fracking is definitely a good choice for them. But on the anti-fracking side, fracking can cause a lot of environmental impacts. It can damage the water supply. So the flowback liquid that we talked about when we talked about what fracking is, the liquid that's coming back that's been mixed with chemicals and oils becomes toxic. And if there's any sort of fracking accident, then that liquid can be released into the local water supply and it can poison it. Fracking is also thought to increase earthquake risks because it involves a lot of pressure below the surface, and that amount of pressure isn't natural. So fracking is thought to cause instability in the ground and cause more earthquakes in areas that fracking occurs. Fracking also causes methane to leak into the air while drilling is occurring. And then it also has been linked to low birth weight in babies that were born near fracking sites. So there was a study done on Pennsylvania babies where they looked at babies before fracking and babies after fracking and observed their weights. And it was found that weights decreased in babies overall as fracking had occurred in that site. So fracking could be having an impact on the health of children as well. And fracking is also a finite resource. We don't have unlimited amounts of oil below the surface, so we can't frack forever. And if we rely on fracking now, then we might run out of natural oil and we might not have a plan for finding other sources. So how will fracking change our planet? We talked about the methane in the air. So fracking is actually changing our air supply. Fracking can also reduce the water supply in fracking sites because fracking sites might not be huge towns. They might be smaller areas with more finite amounts of water. And fracking takes a huge amount of water to do. So it's not a large amount of water if you consider other things such as factory use or nuclear plants. But if you take fracking into a smaller community, then it can really be noticeable. Fracking can also reduce plant life in fracking locations because it can cause toxic soil and it can kill off the plants that live there. And like I mentioned, eventually natural gas will be a resource that runs dry if we continue to frack. So we might not have plans for what to do after that, and then we might find ourselves with an oil shortage. All right, and then that is our lesson for today. Fracking is definitely a highly debated topic, but personally, I think that the environmental impacts make it too risky, and I think that there needs to be a lot more research that goes into it. But you can definitely go to any of these sources and find out more. There's some great videos on fracking, and you can see where you land on the issue.